aspects associated with migrations. Chris?
Great. All right. Thank you, Damon. Let me switch myself to presenter, and we can get started. So I'd also like to thank everybody, for those in the U.S., a little bit early for the holiday weekend, judging by the lack of traffic I saw this morning. I think some people have already taken advantage of that. But I do want to thank everybody for their time today. And as Damon said, we're going to be covering some aspects of the MetaVis platform today. The subject was migration, but migration being only half of the battle. So what we want to talk about today is, of course, some aspect of migration, which we will certainly cover towards the end. But we want to talk about the other half. And the other half is just as important because that is the analysis, the discovery, the insight that anyone needs to have in order to perform a more successful migration. So for folks who are coming in as outside consultants to assist with migrations, to run migrations, to manage migrations, or folks that are admins who aren't really that familiar with the ongoing works with inside of your SharePoint environment, providing this initial insight as to what is there, how it was used, how it's constructed, what is or what is not enabled or turned on. All of that insight will be valuable for executing the migration and making sure it is the most successful that it can be. So the key to that type of migration, or any migration, successful migration, is the knowledge. And gaining this knowledge and this insight is going to be paramount into performing any type of migration, particularly for SharePoint-based migrations, which have a tendency to become very complex. So with all that said, today we're going to talk about the learning, that knowledge, gaining that knowledge, and of course later on we'll talk about some of the actual migration capabilities that are built into the MetaVis platform. So we'll talk a little bit about the architecture of SharePoint, which I have on my screen currently, do some analysis of your content, looking for sensitive data, PII type information, corporate policies, things like that, that will be important to know if you have it, and if you have it, make sure you know where it is. Does it need to be brought across? Should it be moved into a secure location? Things along that. Analyzing security, looking for potential holes, filling those holes, or at least knowing that they're there so you can evaluate and remediate them how necessary, and potentially looking at some more graphical reporting and dashboards towards the end to help you gain better insight in the day 2 management of your SharePoint environments. All right. As Damon mentioned as well in the introduction, a lot of the interest we have lately is with Office 365, but for today's conversation it won't be specific to any one version of SharePoint. The MetaVis platform does support all versions of SharePoint from 2003 up to and including 2013 on-premise and online. And of course OneDrive for Business as well. So some of the stuff we'll talk about today can be applicable to all those different versions of SharePoint. So it's more just a general SharePoint conversation today as opposed to any one location of it. Okay, so quick agenda, then we'll get right into it. So I'm going to try to break it down into 3 parts today. So the first part, we're going to talk about the analysis, the discovery, gaining that knowledge that I mentioned a moment ago. And then we will move into some of the functionality of doing the actual migration, so some of the capability that the tool provides so that you can actually get your content and your structure from one location to another. And then time permitting, I'm hoping we'll have time, we'll talk about some of the day 2 capabilities, which will be some more of the security analysis, backup and protection that Damon mentioned, and things that will help you make sure that once you get into the new environment, you can stay steady in your course, make sure that your governance is in place, make sure that people are doing what they should be doing, and provide tools for you to understand what they're doing and manage on an ongoing basis. And then again, hopefully I will leave some few minutes at the time for Q&A. Okay, so let's get into it. So first piece that we're going to talk about in the first part of the conversation is going to be about the knowledge, gaining knowledge. And one of those aspects of SharePoint that is important to understand is your architecture. Architecture is dealing with the sites, the site collections, your content types, your columns, knowing where those exist, how they're configured, what settings are applied, where they're being used and not used, and gaining that type of information, especially again if you're coming into the situation not knowing the source environment, looking at potentially disorganized or messy SharePoint environment, which some of the older systems we've worked with certainly are, this gives you a good starting point. So I can come in here and I can visualize. I can render out these type of models you see on my screen here, and I can start to understand the relationship. What people have created, what lists, what content types are in those lists, how the content types inherit from one another, where different columns are situated. So you have a better understanding of how it was built, how it evolved, of course, how people continue to create these new objects. And then if it's part of the project, also help you re-architect it. So you don't necessarily have to bring across the mess, the disorganization. You can re-architect it in the destination and then move across what's appropriate. So the first thing we're looking at here again on my screen is our Architect product. This is a modeling tool designed specifically for SharePoint. So we're looking not at the content, the views, the workflows. We're not dealing with those yet. What we're looking at is the components that make up SharePoint. Again, your sites, your columns, your content types. We're visualizing those for you, and we're allowing you to get a better understanding of how and where all of those objects exist. So as you slide around the different renderings here, this is, just to give you a little insight, this is a 2010 team site with a few modifications. Custom lists, content types, columns, things like that. Nothing too extraordinary when it comes to SharePoint. But this gives you a way to visualize all of the different components. I can see all of my list and libraries. I can see the content types that are used within inside of those. I can see all of my column groups and the different types, the different fields that are in those column groups. And then the types down the middle will give you a nice hierarchical representation, so I can see not only all of the types, but I can visually see where the inheritance is between those. So item and everything that inherits there, documents and all the objects that inherit from the document content type. So I get a nice understanding. This one obviously isn't too bad. It's not really that complex. It's not really that disorganized, but we have seen many where this type of branched view gets a little chaotic. So you have lots of different pieces, lots of different aspects of SharePoint that are relating to one another, and it becomes a crucial part of understanding. You can see, you can color code it, you can leave notes. This is particularly helpful for when you're going to the stakeholders who may not understand it to the level that this model provides. You can provide a little bit of guidance to that by leaving some notes, and of course sending it to them. So more than just rendering it here through MetaVis, you also have some capabilities to export it out. So export it out to a PDF, an image file, print it out on a large document, and it gives you some portability. So we can then share this information with others. We can start collaborating on it. If you're re-architecting, we can start to re-architect as a team, and then make sure everybody's comments, make sure everybody's approval, all their feedback is incorporated before you go and actually re-provision it. So it's a great starting point, again, gaining that knowledge, understanding of what SharePoint has in it. Gives you the capability to also export it, so a lot of the different products that we'll talk about today also gives that export capability. So generate it in MetaVis, work with it in MetaVis, but also provide you the capability to export it out of the MetaVis platform and share it with others. It does also, I won't go too much into depth of it today, but it does have the capabilities to also re-architect. So if you want to now create new objects, you want to repurpose content types or columns, create new columns, all of that stuff is also included. So you can go the next step and actually begin building out your new SharePoint environment. Okay. And then of course one thing I always like to point out is search. Search is useful here. We're not searching for content, so we're not doing like a fast search or looking for documents of a certain name. We're searching by objects. So objects could be a content type, for example. Everybody's done it. We try to delete a content type at some point. It says, SharePoint says you can't because it's already in use. It doesn't really tell you where it's in use. This is a great way to find out exactly where that was in use. So it'll go out, it'll search by object types, list, libraries, columns, any type of column type, and it'll just tell you exactly where that column or content type is being used within SharePoint. And then you can take the appropriate action. All right, so good jumping off point here, giving you that first piece of knowledge, which of course is the architecture, how it makes up. This does work with content type hubs, so for those folks who are looking to move into that level of SharePoint in 2010 or 13, this can also tap into your hub, build out your hub, and then from there, of course, SharePoint can publish that out to the appropriate site collections. All right. It also integrates nicely with the terms store, with again 2010 or 2013, which hopefully, time permitting, we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But this does, of course, interact with term store, so as you're creating your managed metadata fields, you can also be expanding and working with your store. And a store will, of course, be another key component for a successful migration, because if you are using that store in the source environment, you want to make sure you definitely bring that across as is, or, of course, bring it across as needed. So it doesn't have to be all or nothing. Okay, so that gives you a little bit of the basics here for the knowledge around the structure, the architecture of your source environment, and of course it can be continued to be used post-migration day 2 on your destination. I want to make a quick transition over here to another piece of information or another tool that will give you another piece of information or knowledge, and that would be the Informant tool. Informant is designed to provide content and metadata analysis. So it gives you a quick way to find out what content's in your source. That content could be documents that contain sensitive information, personal information. Common example, of course, social security numbers, credit cards, things like that. But it can really be any type of information you're looking for. So the idea is that you create a business rule, whatever rule you're looking for, whatever information you're looking for, whatever metadata you're looking for. You create a business rule. Rules are a combination of conditions and actions. So the condition is I'm searching for something. I'm searching my documents to look for a product name or some kind of alphanumeric combination of characters or simple PII or PHI information, things like that. And I'm going to go out and I'm going to look for it. I'm going to find it. If I find it, I want to make sure I know where it is. And then take it back to my stakeholders and ask them, this is the information, this information that could be potentially sensitive. Let's decide where we want to move it. And where we move it to, if we move it at all, maybe it shouldn't go to the cloud, maybe it should stay on-premise if you're doing a hybrid approach. You want to make sure that wherever it goes, you make sure you know it's going there and it's secured appropriately. So don't put all those employment applications in an unsecured shared documents library. Let's make sure we put them in the HR site in a secured location, and let's make sure that only the appropriate personnel can access that location with the proper security. So this type of knowledge is of utmost importance because we do not want to make sure that you move things that are sensitive to areas which are not secure, or at least you don't know about it. So again, you create your business rules, looking for those conditions. Conditions could be file names, it could be metadata associated to your documents, it could be the content itself. So we'll actually scan your PDFs, your Word documents, your Excel files, and we'll look for what you asked the tool to look for. So it could be any type of strings, user-defined strings. We can tap into your term store if it's 2010 or 2013 and look for terms that are specified there. You also have a couple of pre-canned ones, which would be the basics, PIIs, social securities, credit cards, IPs, things like that. And then for the security-minded folks out there, regular expression. Regular expression is very powerful because it gives you the freedom to write whatever you need to write to look for whatever you need to look for. So it does provide a good bit of functionality specific to your business need. Okay, you have custom formulas as well, ands, ors, or customs. Customs are great because you can include nots. So a lot of tools will search for stuff, not a lot of tools will search for the absence of things. This will. So if you do need to make sure that your documents are tagged with a certain word or contain a certain code or project name or project number for billing purposes, the tool can also be configured to look for the absence of values that should be there and let you know that they do. That they do exist and they do not contain what it should contain. So you have that type of searching for the absence of requirements. And then the actions, of course, you can do is simple reporting just to let you know what it is, non-destructive, nothing's modified. We just tell you that, yes, this was found in this location and this is reasons why. Or you can get a little bit more authoritative, if you want to change some metadata, set a tag on it, or modify some existing tags. You can quarantine it. Quarantine's great, especially for PII type of information. Not really sure what I want to do with it right now, but I absolutely know that nobody else should be able to access it. So let me just quarantine that file or those files in place, and then we'll figure out what to do with them later on. So a number of different actions that are available there. And this tool is great because it's not just SharePoint. We can scan SharePoint, all versions of SharePoint, on-premise and online. We can also tap into your file shares, which is probably the bulk of data out there. So you can tap into your file shares. Your SharePoint, of course, we're talking about here, OneDrive for Business in Office 365, making sure people aren't storing things in their personal sites in the cloud. And if they do, let's figure out, let's find out about it. And you can also run some other reports as well. So a lot of flexibility here, a lot of insight, a lot of important knowledge that can be learned to make sure that what we include with the migration we know about and we're putting it into the appropriate positions. Okay, so that's another piece of information there. Getting a little bit more closer to the specifics of migration, we have the analysis as well. So migration analysis, pre-migration analysis. So as we've gone through, we've done our discovery, we're learning more and more about our architecture, our content analysis, and metadata analysis. We can run security reports, which I hope I have time at the end to talk about in more detail, but if you want to do your security analysis pre-migration, certainly applies to many situations. But specific to migration, of course, we're looking at pre-migration analysis. And what this is providing you the knowledge and insight is for potential issues that may arise specific to the migration process itself. Okay. It also becomes useful for, again, people who are brought in from the outside or aren't familiar with the environment that they're being tasked to migrate, because it'll help you gauge the level of complexity. If there's a lot of customizations, if there's a lot of custom workflows, web parts, templates, things like that, then it's probably going to require a little bit more effort and time on your part to make sure it's all brought across, or at least to explain to the customer or the stakeholders that you have a very complex environment, very complicated, it's going to take X amount of time and X amount of resources. So this is a great tool to help you start on that type of knowledge gaining specific to the actual migration of these locations. And the way that the tool is configured here is it's very simple. So first, most important is it's going to scan the source environment you specify. So whatever site or site collection you want to put in here, that'll be the environment it scans. Target location is completely optional. So a lot of times we talk to people who are not really sure where they're migrating yet. Could be on-premise, could be online, could be a hybrid approach. Not really sure at that point. So the destination is unknown. So the destination for this analysis is not important, or it's not required, I should say. You can just scan a source without a target location, and then we'll just scan for and look for things that are outside the box of SharePoint. So your customizations, workflows, and templates, things like that. If you do specify the target, then we'll do more of a comparative analysis between the two. All right, but the analysis itself provides information about your sites, your lists, and optionally your content. Content, if there is a lot of content and you include it, may consume more time because it's going to look at all of your objects, but we'll talk about that in a second. But it's going to go through and it's going to scan and it's going to look for that type of information. And as it goes out and scans, it's generating a report. And the report is an Excel file. An Excel file with a couple of different worksheets and condition codes. So you'll also know where you have the potential issues and severity levels, 1, 2, or 3. 1 is good, tool looked at it, saw no such objects, excuse me, no such potential issue with that object. 3, on the other hand, is the one that draws your attention towards, and this is going to let you know that with this particular object in this particular report, there may be an issue that you need to focus your attention on. And more than providing this information as a pre-migration analysis, it's also useful, of course, for the migration. So I know which options to configure, what do I need to include or not include, and of course post-migration, as part of your validation process. This is a good starting point with, of course, the log files. So really quick here, some information that you're going to learn, some knowledge here is, first one is templates. So we're looking at all of the templates that were used in the source. You have your site templates, you have your list templates, both the template name and the template ID. ID will be important. We'll talk about that more in a few moments. But this lets you know what was used. So you could have deployed many custom templates. You could have your list template gallery, could be filled with dozens of different templates. What we're looking at here is not the gallery, but which ones are actually used. So which one of those was created using your slide libraries or your Fabulous 40 in 2007. Maybe none of them, or maybe all of them, or just some of them. So this will let you know. And it's also important to understand, because if with the folks moving to SharePoint Online on the call, Microsoft has deprecated a couple of more popular, widely used templates, meeting workspaces. Those are gone from SharePoint Online, blank sites, slide libraries, things that might have been commonly used in a 2003, 7, or 10 environment is no longer supported at this time for SharePoint Online. So understanding if you had them, and of course compensating for those, will be beneficial for the success. Features, really quick here, we're just looking at certain features that are enabled. Source in your source environment, out of the box, custom ones, third-party templates or features, things like that that are active. Again, not that could have been active, but the ones that are actually active on all of your collections and their sites. Web parts, another object here that we don't look at the gallery, so I'm not too concerned that there's 15 different CodePlex web parts in my gallery. I'm only concerned about the 15 or the few of the 15 that were actually used, because maybe they're not important. If we just put them on a couple of test pages, that's fine. I don't need to migrate those across. But if they're sitting on my home pages, for example, or any other page in a wiki library or a pages library, we're looking at the pages themselves, all of the web parts that have been used on those pages, and then giving you that type of same green-red comparison to let you know if it's custom or potentially third-party. And this will give you that very nice understanding of on a page-by-page basis, on a web part-by-web part basis, which ones are being used and where. List analysis becomes important for any migration, but again, particularly for SharePoint Online, where you lose control of some of your thresholds. List view threshold, 5,000 items. Hard-coded, can't change it in SharePoint Online. So if, it's not required, but if you want to break apart, some of those larger lists into 2 or more smaller versions, this is going to give you a clean way to find out in this column where you have lists of or exceeding a certain size, 5,000 in this example. Total size, you have a couple of settings, checked out files, workflows, min-text if you're on-premise, and of course your forms as well. So it gives you a very clean, high-level type of view of over all of your lists to determine what you have inside of them. And again, what I need to enable when we migrate them across. Site-level workflows are supported as well, and of course content. Content is the big one. If you have a lot of content, you're going to have a lot of report, you're going to have a lot of time to generate it, but it will go through, look at all of your data, give you some characteristics, let you know if it's currently checked out, gives you that type of insight on a very granular item-by-item basis. So certainly a lot of information that can be gained from this type of interface. It also works for file shares as well. File shares, of course, not as nearly as complex as SharePoint, so the options are a little less, but it's looking for those known limitations if you're doing a large file share onboarding, your path lengths, invalid characters, blocked extensions, things like that, which are known limitations that folks deal with when moving content into a SharePoint location. All right, so that could certainly be helpful as you go through and start to work with the actual migration when you get into the migration. And it's just looking for potential issues and, of course, how you can compensate for them. The other big object, again, when we're dealing with 2010 or 2013 is your stores, your term stores. So I'll just briefly talk about this, try to circle back a little bit later, time permitting, and give you some more in-depth around the management of your stores. But here, for the purpose of migration, of course, you're moving your store or just some of the store. So this will give you a nice way to visualize all of your store, see the different components that make them up, your groups, your sets, your terms, nested terms, synonyms. Gives you a nice way to do that. And strictly for the purpose of migration, I can come in here and select individual sets, individual terms, a couple of groups, all of it, some of it, whatever is needed, and I can migrate that from one term store to another. So it is important, especially now that we're talking about pre-migration, because obviously if you used your store in the source, you have to make sure that it's brought across as well. Okay, let me spend just a minute before we get to the actual migration. I just want to spend a few minutes here talking about security, because that's one of those objects that security model in SharePoint that could be important pre-migration just as much as important as it could be post-migration. And security here allows you to do your analysis. So if you're being brought in to re-architect the security, or being brought in as a security consultant to try to find issues, find holes, or maybe you just need to figure out who has access to what, how they have access to it, and things like that. Orphan users, another great example for migration. Find out who your orphan users are so you can compensate for them as they're being migrated across. But there's many use cases here for security, but the high-level idea is that it is an analysis tool. It provides real-time analysis for any versions of SharePoint, 2007 and above, 2003. A little bit different of a security model, but 2007 and above, on-premise or online. This gives you a real-time security analysis tool, so all of the reports that are generated and displayed are using real-time data, not cached data. And it provides a number of actions as well. So more than just giving you the report, all of the reports are also actionable. Actionable as far as migration goes. If I just want to move the security, I absolutely can. Or if I'm working post-migration, I want to make sure that my governance on my security remains intact. So this goes out and it gives you all these real-time reports. The reports themselves can also be exported. So similar to Architect, giving this information, transferring this knowledge to other users, to your colleagues, to your teammates, to your stakeholders. This will allow you to take this valuable information specific to security and share it with the rest of your team. It does work with both SharePoint groups, SharePoint group membership, so you can see who's in the groups, and it'll also work with Active Directory. So if you have domain groups, it will also go and show you who's inside of those domain groups. Domain groups here would be either on-prem, of course, or federated to the cloud. So even if you're working with Office 365, ADFS, or DirSync, you push in those Active Directory groups to the cloud, we can still go out there and grab the membership. So you get that extra level of detail to see who's exactly inside of this group that has full control, for example. Right? So you have a number of those reports, and again, the actions are all available here. Depending on the report you're looking at, you'll have a different set of actions, but the actions could be as simple as just modifying permissions. So this user here, or this domain group, has edit control, but I need to switch it to design control. Very simple, very quick, and it can be done in multi as well. So if I need to multi-enable or multi-select different users or groups, I have that functionality available as well. So it doesn't have to be a one-by-one process. But what we're looking at here, the knowledge we're looking for, is potential security issues. People who have access to locations that shouldn't have access to locations. I can very simply go in here and search by a user and tell me everything that this particular user or this group of users has access to and what level of access they do have. And this will go out there and give you a nice clean report showing you that information. If someone's about to be let go from a company, it might be important to know what they currently have access to do. Or if the person's already have left the company, you have a nice option here to transfer. So as employee turnover happens, which is inevitable in every company, you need to take care of the security. Whoever comes in to replace that person most likely will need the same set of permissions as that original person had, so you can do a very quick, clean transfer from one user to another. Or if you're expanding your team out, you take the permissions of one user and grant them to another user. So you have that type of actionable intelligence here to allow you to come in and, of course, modify and work with your SharePoint security. Okay. When it gets down to orphan users, again, we're looking at users who are no longer with the organization. Most people disable accounts. Some people delete accounts, depending on the situation. But this will allow you to go out and scan through that SharePoint environment that you're looking at and let you know orphan users, who is no longer around, whose accounts are orphaned inside of SharePoint. For the purpose of migration, of course, it's important to know that because you need to make sure that security is maintained. If the user is no longer around, then of course we can't set security. And also for your authorship information, created by and modified by, how do you want to handle that? A number of ways we can do that. We'll talk about that in migration, but here for the discovery portion, it's good to have that initial insight. Of course, you can come through and remove, if that's the permission. If that's the remediation you want to take, then you can come out here and just simply start cleaning up. So cleanup can be done, of course, in the source environment pre-migration, or you can bring it across and do it post-migration. Okay. A number of other reports that are built in the tool is geared around inventory. Inventory is good for migration. You can do content inventory reports, which will go through an entire location, site collections, lists, if you want to get a little bit more granular, and it'll just give you an inventory of content. What data is in there, what metadata does it have, how many versions, how big are the files. It gives you that type of information so that you can better gauge what you need to migrate across specific to content. Here in security, you also have the inventory report for security. So this is going to go out, it's going to give you a nice clean report that you can export out. Again, useful for pre-migration because you want to get a better understanding of who has access to what, and especially if you're going to re-architect it with inside of SharePoint, this also acts as a good starting point. So you'll be able to see all of your site, your list, your item permissions, whether it's inherited or not, and of course group membership. And this information will be exported out to a report, or you can save it directly back into SharePoint so others can consume it. And it gives you a very clean top-to-bottom type of analysis or an audit report of your security. And that will look similar to this. So you just have very simple, very basic, top to bottom, starting at that site, all the way down to every file and folder, who has access to it, users and groups, who they are, and of course their security level. And anybody can view this, email it to whomever needs it, open it up in Excel, view this information, collaborate, work on it, re-architect it, and then you can use it to, back in MetaVis if you want to, you can use it as you want to come through and start creating your new security model or changing it. All right, so a number of things here that can be used pre or post. There's a couple other things we can talk about a little bit later, time permitting. But I do want to jump back here and spend a few moments talking about the actual migration, of course. So half the battle is learning about, gaining the knowledge, understanding it, analyzing it, doing your discovery, and of course the other half is actually performing the migration. So let's talk about a couple of things here that we do support. First thing I always like to point out is that we do support scripting. So I know there's a number of people out there, especially SharePoint admins, IT folks, things like that, who just like to use scripts. More comfortable, more efficient for them, whatever the case is, they just want to do scripts. They don't want to come through, connect, jump through wizards, check boxes, things like that. So we do fully support scripting. I'll show you a couple examples of that in a moment, but we do support scripting, we do support scheduling, so there's automation built in, and we do have that type of robust functionality if that's the way in which you want to interface with the tool. Okay, but for the purposes of the conversation today, we're going to do it through the interface just so you can see what is available. So first thing you can see is that we do have different types of connections that are possible. If you're dealing with Office 365 and you're a global administrator, you can connect in through your admin console. You can work with your SharePoint side. This will be all of your SharePoint site collections. And if you're licensed, you can also work with the OneDrive for Business side, which will be all of your currently provisioned OneDrive for Business accounts. So you will have the flexibility to work with either or both of those depending on your license. For on-premise, of course, you can connect into your farm, 2007, 10, or 13. You'll see web apps, and inside of your web apps will be your site collections. So it gives you a little bit more of a farm type of view. Or for any version of SharePoint, 3 up to 13, you can connect directly to a specific site or site collection, and this will allow you to see visually all the components within that. So my site, all of my list and libraries, and subsites beneath those. And if you need to go granular, you can double-click on any list or library. Content appears on the right side. So it has that kind of SharePoint Designer look on the left with your navigator, and then the larger portion on the right, which is going to be your content, which you can take some more granular actions with. All right, some of the other sources really quick we support: file shares, network drives, of course, public folder, exchange-based content, Box, Google Drive, some of those other cloud providers out there if you're moving in from those into the Microsoft stack. All right, so for the purposes of migration, again, using it through the tool, scripting, we'll talk about it more in just a second. The process to do the migration, very simple. You want to select whatever you need to migrate. You could pick up and move across everything. Some people just want to do bulk migration. Others want to spend the time to reorganize, restructure, leave some content behind, retag content, reclassify it, things like that. But all of those are supported. It just depends on how you want to engage the tool for the specific requirements that you have. But the process is usually very similar. So you want to select whatever you need from the source, whatever version of SharePoint you're using. Select your site or your site collection. Maybe just grab a couple of subsites. You can drop into any of those and grab a few lists. Or you can come in here granularly and grab some data. Files, folders, calendar events, task items. Doesn't really matter, any content within inside of a list. And that'll be your item migration. So very granular, very specific, but very powerful if you need to be on that level of migration. But again, the idea is simple. You take whatever you want from the source, you copy it from there, you jump over to your destination, and you paste it. Drag and drop, Control-C, Control-V, usual copy-paste controls are available. It is wizard-driven, so as you go through and do your migration, it will present the appropriate wizard depending on what you're copying. For this quick example here, we're doing a site, so you have options to do site consolidations or merges. Great to bring a couple of different departmental sites together if necessary. You can re-architect or re-parent your sites, moving sites between collections. Level 3 subsite, you want to move up to 1 or down to 5. You can demote site collections if you're looking to scale back on that level. And of course you can do the reverse and you can promote 2 new site collections as well. This one does require you to be an administrator so that we can connect to your farm or your tenant to actually provision the new collection, but it's certainly possible using the tool set. And then second page, which I'll just go through very briefly, is where you're going to get all of the options. So as I move across this object, this is where I can configure exactly what I want to do. So you'll have some basic options, which are probably pretty self-explanatory to the folks on the call. Your types and your fields, your subsites, your security. So all of the security is supported. Sites, lists, and items for 2007 and above. SharePoint groups, feature activation, your home pages, workflows, SharePoint Designer-based workflows, min-text workflows for on-premise. Those can also be included. And again, as we talk about these, think back to the analysis. A lot of these number 3s, number 2s, number 1s, how you want to compensate for them, if at all. If you decide to bring it across, you might just decide to leave it behind or archive it. A lot of those 3s there can be compensated as we go through and set up the migration. So on the list, you have your content. This will be the bulk. This will be all of your data. Version history can be scaled back, some more security options, and of course some more workflows and forms. Okay, under advanced options, one that jumps out to most people is the incremental. Some refer to it as delta migration, but this allows you to do it in stages. So you don't have to rush. Don't put the extra pressure on yourself to get it done over the course of one weekend or this long Labor Day weekend coming up for the folks in the U.S. Enjoy it. Don't try to rush a migration because you have that extra day. Incremental will allow you to take your time, do it in stages, do it in waves, department at a time, site by site. Do it in the background, validate it, do your user acceptance testing, make sure everything's good. Incremental allows you then to come back a second time or third time days, weeks, or months later. And for this operation, we're going to look to see what has created or modified, versioned, or edited in that past 4 weeks, and we're going to migrate just that to the destination. So you can continue to let people work in the source, do what they need to do. You take your time, do the migration, do everything you need to do, and then get that last little bit of data, which hopefully should be a significantly smaller subset of data. Do that in the course of a week or a weekend, right before your cutoff date. So very nice tool to have, or option within the tool to have, so that you can take your time and do it right, and do it successfully. Some options for workflow conversion, user mapping. Most of the times it's not necessary, but there are cases where the tool just cannot programmatically resolve your user accounts. Different domains sometimes, merges and acquisitions where you're merging 2 Active Directories together. That type of thing might have to be handled by user mapping. Templates and web parts. Let me just jump back to the report here. So again, these 3's on your template reports. Fabulous 40 template that may no longer be around 2010 or 2013. You may have to remap to a different template. Slide library that's not an SPO, or blank sites, meeting workspaces, things like that. If you used them, you have to tell the tool what you want it to use in place of a template that's no longer available. That's what you can do with your template mapping. And your web parts goes to the idea that you want to get rid of web parts. So if you have a CodePlex web part that was deployed and it's no longer supported in 2013, or you no longer need it, it'll allow you to come through and specify that you want to remove that web part from all of the pages. And that gives you the ability to do some cleanup on a web part by web part basis. Okay, and then the look and feel at the end, just touch on this briefly. Always a topic of conversation, look and feel. Look and feel changes. Every version of SharePoint, it looks different, functions different, feels different. So they are not very similar. There is some similarities. So the menu systems, your quick launch bars, your navigations, your titles, those have been pretty consistent across the different versions of SharePoint. And those are the things that you can, if you choose to, migrate across so that the menu systems stay in place. More complex things like master page galleries, page layouts, can in some situations also be brought across, but it's really going to be on a case-by-case basis depending on how it was customized, the way it was customized, and of course the different versions of SharePoint you're migrating between. Okay, but again, this refers to some of that surface level look and feel changes that may have been done. Okay, and then on the final page here, just want to pop up the scripts really quick. So if you are doing it via scripts, command line, PowerShell, batch files, really any scripting language that you're comfortable with, this allows you to do it very easily. You just call MetaVis, operation is copy, copy site, copy list, source and target locations. This becomes nice for PowerShell if you want to swap those out with variables, and then just load in one script, loads in a bunch of different source and targets. Gives you a nice way to do some bulk migrations. And then at the tail end will be all of your different switches, representing the checkboxes we just spoke about. So it gives you a way to be very, very powerful, very efficient if you're comfortable scripting. And then you'll be able to do more efficient migrations without having to come in here and check off a bunch of boxes. All right, scheduling is also incorporated. Scheduling and scripting, we saw it in a few of the different products. Security had it, didn't really point it out, but it's on a lot of the security dialogues as well. So you can schedule these operations to take place at a specific day and time. And of course, everything's available on demand via the Finish button. Right, and that's what you will have then, and the migration will start for you immediately and give you the capabilities, of course, to move those objects based off your configurations. All right, I want to talk about one thing, just looking at my watch here. I want us to leave a few minutes at the end. I'm not sure if there are questions, but I want to leave a few minutes at the end for questions. So let me just talk about a couple of more really quick points. One of them being Live Compare. Live Compare here in migration. Live Compare is also available throughout much of the other products. So Architect has a version of Live Compare, Security, Term Stores, they all have their own version of Live Compare. But the fundamental functionality of that feature is the same. what this allows you to do is to compare two objects in SharePoint. Two different, in migration, it's going to be two different sites. One site on the left, another site on the right. It doesn't have to be the same version, nor does it have to be the same location. So this could be a 2007 on-premise. This could be your 2013 SPO environment. You load in any two SharePoints, and it's going to do a real-time comparison between them. And the real-time comparison is looking for differences. If there are differences, what are they? And if you choose to, take the appropriate action. Again, here in migration, the action would be to migrate it from one to another. So it's looking at many different object types in SharePoint, looking at some of the structure, your groups and your types, looking for differences in those. Your list and libraries. List and library difference could be the list is missing altogether, so it needs to be brought across, or the list was brought across, but a content type wasn't. Someone changed a column type. The content may or may not be different. This will give you the ability to see on a list-by-list basis if there are any differences in what they are between those. So configuration, settings, security, workflows. You have security on your site level, which will span the security, the permissions on the site, the permission levels, and of course your groups. Web parts here is looking at the galleries, workflows on your sites, and another way to deal with term stores through Live Compare is this side-by-side relationship. So if you have dev in a prod environment or dev, test, and prod, if you have three, this is a good way to compare dev against prod, look for differences in the term store or anywhere else, identify those differences visually, and move them across left to right or right to left. So it's a nice way to have some more visual experience to pre-migration, during the migration, and of course post-migration as well if you want to do some validation. Okay. This too can be exported out, so another one of these reports that you can generate in MetaVis and share it with folks who don't have MetaVis installed. This will save out to an Excel file so that they can view it through Excel, of course. They don't have to have MetaVis installed. So another way to provide some collaboration or to share this information between your team. All right, so that'll be available there in migration, and as I said, a few other products within inside of the suite. Okay, so we have a few minutes left. Let me see. I'm sure, Damon, if you've been monitoring the questions.
Sure. So let me take a look in the chat here.
If not, I can spend a few more moments.
I am not super fluent in the maybe you spend a few more minutes. I'll take a look and see if I can.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's a questions section of the console. So let me just jump back to security because there's a couple of things here I want to talk about post-migration. So again, pre-migration, migration itself is great. Day two management, governance, some people like to refer to it. It's important to stay on top of it. So if once you re-architect your security, make sure people are still inside of it. Set up your backups and your protection routines, archiving. If you're dealing with OneDrive, archiving out users' OneDrives who are no longer with the company. You know, a lot of that day two management stuff is just as important as is moving the data into 365, or any version of SharePoint, SharePoint on-premise as well. So a lot of the things here, again, going to that type of comparison that we just spoke about in Live Compare, it is also available here in Security Manager. This is going to be just a security comparison. But it also goes down to object level comparison. So not just looking at two different sites, dev versus test, for example, but it could be parent versus child. So if I come through here and I see that a lot of people are going through making permissions unique on different sites, different lists, hopefully not, but different items, it certainly can get out of control very quickly. That's something you want to get on top of, and you want to make sure that you can manage it. Manage it might be come through here and as an admin, just re-inherit permissions. So you're telling people stop doing that, and I'm going to come through and correct it for them. But maybe there are times, and there certainly are times, where you need to have unique permissions on the list or a folder or a file. And it's important to understand who has access to it. So I can see very clearly that, yes, it has unique permission on my calendar event. I can right-click on it. I can say, show me who has access to it. It's going to go out real time, generate that information for you, present it back into the console, and give you the edit controls. So maybe everything's good. Maybe here Rob has read control, but Rob really should have full control. So I can select him, I can switch it over to full control. I click finish and it immediately goes out and switches the security. So I have that real-time interaction to make the appropriate changes. Or if I need to go out and do the comparison again, parent versus child, to see what's different. Why is this calendar event unique and what's unique about it as opposed to its parent? I can simply activate that comparison, and I'm looking at the security of this calendar event versus the security of its parent. And I'm providing that type of color coding to let you know that yes, there are differences, so it's not just uniquely secured for the sake of being unique. There are some differences here, so this one group has edit control on the parent, does not have it on this item. Maybe that's right, maybe that's wrong. If it's wrong, you of course can remediate that by granting access to that group. Or maybe it is the same and I just want to remove the inheritance from that object, and I can do that as well by just re-inheriting from its parent. So this is another part of that analysis where it's giving you some more direct feedback. So not just looking at a static report, I'm having some type of intelligence being presented back to give you a better understanding of why it's unique, or why does this object exist, or how does this person have access to this object. Well, they have it because they're inside of a group, they're inside of this group. So you have that type of discovery built in. And that's definitely prevalent throughout security, and hopefully through today's conversation you can see it's prevalent throughout the rest of the MetaVis platform as well. Okay, so let me see here if I can see if there's any questions. We have just a few minutes left, and this console is a little difficult to maneuver here. So when we're Office 360's browser login supported when connecting to any site. Yes, yeah, there's a number of ways to connect to Office 365. Connect through the tenant. If you're a global admin, connect through a specific site or site collection. If you connect to a site or site collection, you do need to have at least designer rights in order for the tool to communicate. Ports and protocols. Ports, we go through your default port 80 or 443, whatever you have, so there's no specific requirements as far as setting up ports or doing port forwarding. And yes, you can do bulk editing of metadata. Let me just jump to that really quick. So within the migration, another aspect we talked about is dealing with metadata. You can reassign metadata as it's migrated across, or you can do it post-migration or in place. So at any time, if there's a new content type you want to add, new columns or new metadata that you want to change, you can come in here and in place select a bunch of files or folders or content within a list, and you have an option to tag. And this provides you the ability to come through and change to a different content type. If you want to, you just re-architected a new type, now you have to apply it to a bunch of your existing data. And of course, you can work with your columns themselves. Date columns, text columns, lookup columns, manage metadata columns, they're all supported and all available here for bulk in-place tagging. And there's a number of ways you can also interface with this functionality via scripts, CSV files, and whatnot that will allow you to be a little bit more robust. So a lot of that stuff we have done in the past webinars specific to migration, and we have a number of those videos, documentations, how-tos on our website. So if there are any additional questions specific to migration, we certainly have a lot of that resources on our website. Okay, I think that takes us to the end. Damon, did you have any final words?
Nope, just thank you everybody for your participation today. We certainly appreciate your time, and feel free to contact us if you have any additional questions. I did manage to save the question log, so we will go through it and see if we can't formulate some responses. But thanks again. Have a great holiday weekend, and hopefully we'll talk with you soon.
All right. Thanks, everybody.